So, in this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast, I am joined by Kurian Tharakan, who is, I guess you could say, multifaceted when it comes to the art of charisma, compelling storytelling, and the art of communications. Kurian is the author of the 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, amongst a host of other things, which we are going to hopefully dive deeply into. So, if you are in need of more effective communications, leadership style, or really experimenting with different styles of communication, then you are listening to the right episode. So, welcome to the show, Kurian.
Thanks for having me on, Neil. It's I've done a lot of things in the last 30 odd years, and ultimately, at my core, um, I'm a salesman. At my core, I'm a salesman, and I've always had sales and marketing roles, which are very different in the various organizations I've been with. So I've been in the technology space. I've been in mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance. I've been in digital marketing services, all sorts of different things. But at the core of it is that everybody has the need to sell first their ideas and then their subsequent products and services. And I was an executive in residence in a couple of different business incubators here in the Edmonton region. I'm way up here in Canada, across the pond, as you would say, right? And here in Alberta, Canada, and there's a couple of business incubators I was with, and I was working with numerous university spin-outs, engineers, scientists, PhDs of various kinds, and they were all trying to launch a new product or a new service, and they never went to school for any kind of a sales or marketing perspective, right? Yet they were forced now to go out and sell their ideas to investors and employees, let alone the markets as a whole. And so we really needed to come up with a format for them where they're not being taught Dale Carnegie type of methodologies, or even, sophisticated methods like the BASE method or anything like that. Even spin. Spin is a very, very common framework for doing this, and really easy to understand. But for the most part, these entrepreneurs who are actually scientists and engineers, they needed something that was easier than that, right? And something that they could go into and not really be consider themselves as selling, because selling is not what they went to school for. But here they are, they're being forced into the situation. And probably the easiest thing in the world to do for everybody to be able to be more persuasive, because we all need to be more persuasive, is to tell better stories. And that's where it came from. And so this idea of writing a book around the kinds of stories that people have told through millennia, to bring people into the tent, have rested on these 7 pivotal pillar stories that charismatic leaders have used throughout time. That's where it all started.
It's interesting. So this is kind of really based on, anecdotal evidence from your journey, which obviously has been, really, really interesting and very broad and very relevant, I guess, to the topic. But also, there's some science behind this, isn't there? Because as you kind of delve into a number of these areas, and we will go to these 7 areas for the audience in a little while. But I'm just curious, really, as to kind of how did you kind of create the 7? Because there must be probably more than 7, but you've prioritized that there are 7, which are the most fundamental ones.
What we say is that these are the 7 primary stories. There can be hundreds of splinter stories, thousands of splinter stories that you can have. There's no end to the nuance that you can apply to. But the way we did this is that we looked through the history of written communications, let alone oral traditions and such, right? And where it came down to was back in the 1970s. This quote always fascinated me, and that was in the 1970s during the birth of Silicon Valley. And this was during the days of Fairchild Semiconductor and the early days of Intel, the beginning days of Apple. And this was in the mid 1970s. There was a Silicon Valley marketing guru by the name of Regis McKenna. And I remember reading about Regis, 30 years ago. And this quote always stayed with me. And what Regis said is that great marketing takes its cues from great religion. And so, and so if you really think about that, you go through the historical aspects of religion. There's been thousands of religions throughout time, thousands. But today we have dominant religions. At the top is going to be Christianity, with about 2.1, 2.2 billion adherents. We've got Islam with about 1.8, 1.9 billion adherents, and both of those are Abrahamic religions. They come from Judaism, Father Abraham. And Judaism, surprisingly enough, only has about 15 million adherents throughout the world. Okay. And of course, Hinduism is up there with 800 million, and on it goes. But at the core of these religions, why did these religions survive? Why do they dominate today after thousands of religions being birthed over the course of humankind's early attempts at civilization? So human civilization, where we come together in a location. So we're not nomadic tribes people. We're not bands of hunter-gatherers. Come together, we grow our crops, we raise farm animals, for consumption, those kind of things. That's been about 13,000 years now. And this idea of religion really sprung up out of this idea that we're coming together in one place, right? And we had this need now to come together and understand what was controlling, what was, inciting the world at large. How do we protect ourselves? How do we provide for ourselves? And religion provided that kind of basis. Now, what's interesting is that 2,000 years ago, so Christianity has been around for a little over 2,000 years now. Islam has been around since the 600s. Why are these the two dominant religions? And if you take a look at it back in the early hundreds, like hundreds AD, from the death of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, all the way down to maybe the hundreds, 200s, these were just a band of nuts. They were zealots. They were crazy people that the Romans were persecuting, right? They were trying to extinguish this, crazy bunch of people. But somehow the religion was able to survive. Somehow was able to survive. And ultimately, what it comes down to, we go back to the Regis example. They had dominant stories and they had dominant values. And one of the clearest values is that you bring other people into the tent, proselytization. So not only do you have the stories to tell in these 7 categories, but then you have to share the good news with as many people as possible. And so both Islam and Christianity do this, right? Then they are able to, really dominate with these stories and bring more people into the tent. And, if we take a look at it, I think one of the numbers that was bandied about is that Christianity grew at about a 3% compounded annual growth rate since its inception in the early, aughts, 00. 32 AD, whatever that was. So that's interesting to me, and so if that's true for religion, what can we do to help our organizations also grow in that way? And every organization, and this might be heretical to some people, and you may not really like to hear it, but all organizations have their own religion, and it's not about worshiping a God. You worship values. You worship belief systems. You worship principles of action that allow you to grow these ideas of transformation into something of value for the marketplace at large. So that's where it all came from.
It's a really, really interesting perspective. And I guess once we're looking at, and we will stay on the topic of, looking within the organization and within leadership and communication. But as you were describing that, I was thinking there's also then the spin-off benefit of effective storytelling and communication to all stakeholders around the organization, because you could see this, the religion of certain brands. I mean, I would say I religiously use, you can see the computer behind me, I'm an Apple fan through and through, and it's more than just a brand, and I kind of felt a little pang of guilt there when you sort of said that, because I thought, Yeah, it is kind of like a religion for me. It's like, would I use any other competing product? No, I wouldn't. So I'm kind of bought into this whole storytelling, this whole brand positioning, this lifestyle thing, which again, is that religious? Is it, mythical? Is it brand? Is it the essence of who I am? Does it really matter? Well, yes, of course it matters, because I need to see that kind of, I guess, alignment of values and purpose, and that drive needs to really be authentic to me, either as an employee or as a customer. So yes, some really interesting kind of analogies here, and I can see really how that would link up. So this is important stuff, isn't it?
It really is. And in fact, what I would ask you is that if you had to describe your loyalty to Apple and why you only buy a Macintosh or Apple products of various kinds, how would you do that? And the only way you can do that is through the stories that you tell. And it would probably, 99% of them fit within the 7 primal stories that are in the book.
So with that as an example, now I'm too curious. I had a whole bunch of other questions I wanted to ask you, but I want to get into these 7 stages, these 7 stories, because yeah, I need to kind of know the answer. So if anybody's listening to this and is thinking, yeah, well, I'm actually a slave to this particular brand, it might be a car manufacturer, it could be a certain food brand, or like me, there's a tech brand. Make some notes here, guys, because you're going to learn a lot from this, because these are 7 essential stories people want from their leaders, from their brands, from their religions. This is multifaceted. So
Yeah.
can you kind of share with us then, Karen, the kind of the way that this kind of shapes up then with the 7?
Well, the 7 stories, what they do is, what the whole first part of the book is all about culture. And there's 7 pillars of culture. And then you infuse the culture with these 7 stories. Culture is the always on operating system that guides behavior in your organization, even when there is no one around to reward, punish, or control that behavior, right? So people just know what to do. So you establish that culture first, and the whole first part of the book is about how to establish culture, identify and establish culture. And then the 7 stories, we start with, everything from creation and origin. How did this begin? What is the inciting incident that allowed the first people to create that central value proposition that moves things forward, right? Second thing is all about identities, beliefs, and values. Who are we as people? What are our most profound beliefs and values that drive us forward? What must we never violate? What must we always adhere to? So we go through those kinds of things. Story number 3 is all about the big idea. And the big idea is that central guiding concept that assembles everything else around it. For Apple, it might be design and ease of use and elegance of experience, those kind of things. The only thing that that violates that to me is iTunes, right? In iTunes, I don't get the clunky interface, things like that. But most Apple products, elegant design, simple to use, intuitive. Those are the values that really drive that big idea. Story number 4 is all about the enemy we face. And the enemy we face is not only, is something that can be an individual, but it can also be the elements. It could be a hurricane. The east coast of the U.S. right now is really getting together to be able to, batten down for the various hurricane season that's going to happen, right? So we battle against someone or something. But it can also be not something you're against, but something you're for. So you can say you're against, childhood poverty, or you can say you are for adult literacy. And those are just different frames, right? Different concepts, but the spin on is different, whether it's a positive frame or a negative frame. Story number 5 is the mighty winds. And every organization has a macro set of trends that it is fitted within. And macro trends of various kinds, of societal trends, technological, economic, environmental, political, and legislative trends. And so when you are on trend, you have the power of all this free wind to power your ship sails. And I say every business is like a sailing ship, but you need the power of the wind. Sometimes there's no wind, which means that you have to power everything yourself. So you might as well be on trend. If you're off trend, your boat's going to capsize. So we need to identify these 6 macro trends and identify how we can be more aligned with all of this free wind power. Story number 6 is all about the journey we must undertake. And that is, if the first 5 stories are true, if they are true, there's a little equal sign. If they're believable and true, there's a little equal sign. And it's obvious that this is the journey we must undertake. It is so obvious and so evident that these are the next steps that everybody is ready to take those with you. But you need one more story. And that final story is the why we will win story. And so now here's the journey we must undertake. Here's why we will win. And so the why we will win story encompasses what we call not only the process of how we are going to go to victory, but also what we call keystones. And keystones are those things that guarantee the win. So common keystones throughout history have been superior God, superior technology, superior strategy, superior people. There's hundreds of keystones. But when you give your people a why we will win story with the keystones, then the confidence goes through the roof, and then you have real belief in the direction of your organization. And those are the 7 stories.
So when you got to point 6 there, the 6th story, the feeling I had there was from, I'm a marketer through and through, so I'm not a salesperson. And I felt really, really positive and really kind of empowered at that point, level 6, because the reason for it was what I'm then hearing is it's reasons to buy from the audience's perspective rather than actually having to sell to them. So you started off by saying, I'm a salesperson, but actually what you're doing is you're not selling, are you? Because by the time you get to point 6, you've given them every reason to buy, which is just the most pure, perfect way to sell ultimately, isn't it? There's something nice about that.
The hero of your story is not you. The hero of your story is your customer, is your client. And you have that fundamentally puts you into the position of being that guide, that fairy godmother, the wise wizard that will enable the journey in the most expedient and the most powerful and the most rewarding way possible. So that's what your company is. Your company's products and services then therefore are simply the tools to enable the transformation promise in the story that you're telling. So everything that we're doing is saying, you're here, hero, and you want to get here. And so this journey you have to take, you can do it on your own, or you can do it with my tools and services. And so that's the equivalent of that magic elixir, that wand, the magic wand, the incantation that you're going to give. And it is a very common type of storyline. In fact, it's called the hero's journey or the monomyth. A lot of people have written about these kind of things, and very common legends and myths will have this baked into it. So you always have the hero, that is just doing whatever they're doing at the beginning, and then they're called to action, but they are reluctant to go to the call to action. But they meet somebody, and they meet somebody that is going to help them to this inevitable call. And so we go through it, and the most common recent example of that is probably Star Wars. It's probably Star Wars, but the ancient Greek myths and the Roman myths and things like that, they all had these baked into it. It's a very, very common model that writers will use, authors will use.
So we started this conversation, I guess. Well, I teed this up by saying, this is what charismatic leaders would be looking for, but it feels to me that this is just so much greater than just purely leadership. I mean, yes, clearly this can manifest within a leadership scenario and can make you very, very clear communicator, can get your whole team or your whole business on side, etc., etc. But actually, this could apply equally so to a very small team meeting where you're pitching an idea to the rest of your colleagues in a small meeting room, and you just want to kind of get your idea out there. It feels like these 7 stories are it's the mantra for being influential, for negotiating in a way where the person on the end of the audience feels, well, actually, this was kind of my idea because I've kind of bought into this, and now I'm really I'm part of this. It's a very collaborative way of communicating, isn't it?
It's about the only way your prospects, your people at large, the way you understand your world is through the stories you tell yourself about the world. So the only way you can get somebody to understand you is by telling your story. The only way they can show you that they understand you is by repeating that story, with that empathy and that understanding and that insight, and to be able to show those knowledge gaps, that you may not have considered yet. And when you do that, when people hear their story, they identify with the storyteller. I have a line that I use with my coaching clients, and that is that the spell is cast when they immerse themselves in the stories you tell. So the story is such an immersive experience that you are completely lost. The reality objectively out here where you're at is completely distant, and you are completely immersed in the story. And we've all had that experience in a great movie setting, for example, in the theater, where you're completely lost in the moment and you are in absolute awe of what is the spectacle on the screen. And I've had that experience multiple times. And, and when when a movie doesn't deliver that, then it's a bad movie. That's what it comes down to. The last movie that I really saw where that really took place was Dune. And you're completely immersed in the storytelling, the imagery, the visuals of various kinds, the sound, just the entire spectacle. You are immersed in it. And that's when the magic happened. The spell has been cast. And so ultimately, we are all in that business of storytelling to the level of immersive experience where people can visualize themselves. They can see themselves. They can completely feel themselves in that future moment. And when they do that, then the process of buying into, no one wants to be sold anything, but they buy into this idea of that future projection.
I really, really appreciate you sharing the cinematography kind of angle there, because I think, for a lot of us, that is the real kind of moment where I think, as part of this storytelling, where people will really get it, because we've all got a favorite film, or we've all got a movie in the last, 12 months that we've seen and really enjoyed because we just could not escape from that theater or that screen. And we know the reason why, and we know that, as you say, it was just immersive to all senses of the word. And I think, when it comes to maybe doing a presentation at work, when it comes to, engaging in a sales situation with a customer, when it comes to talking to your partner, for example, over, the next big idea that you've got for where you're going to be going for vacation or something like that, there's so many different opportunities for practicing this, isn't it? This isn't just purely for a leadership standing in front of your sort of your colleagues,
right? If you have kids, you're in the business of storytelling. Okay, and the stories you tell are all about how to get along in this world, how to make the most of your opportunities, how to protect yourself. All of these can be put forward in facts, or they can be made memorable in story, and story sticks. The story, people have a really tough time remembering facts. They have next to no effort in remembering stories. Stories are very powerful. Our brain has, through eons of evolution, been completely programmed and evolutionarily wired to remember story. And back, in the nomad tribes, 30,000 years ago, 100, like the first humans, modern humans would have come out of Africa 2 million years ago. Like Homo sapiens came out about 300,000 years, 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. That's the current iteration of modern humans, right? So Neanderthals are there, Homo habilis was there, all these kind of people. But Homo sapiens, one of the clearest things that they did, and sapien means wise. Okay, and one of the clearest things that allow them to be wise is the ability to retain and create insight, find insight in the various knowledge, the facts, and things like that. And the biggest part of that was stories. And so this idea of being able to cumulatively build upon the stories that you have, and that's how knowledge took place. Right? From the instant that we were able to control fire, right, we were on our way to developing the atomic bomb. It was inevitable. It was inevitable because of the rate of cumulative knowledge. It's all based in story, though. And the story is potential, possibility. Oh, that didn't work, but this is why. And you tell stories, right? And then the facts are there, but until the facts are imbued with meaning, it has a tough time staying. So we want to be able to create facts with meaning, which means that you have to be a great storyteller.
So how much of this is evidence-based? I mean, I'm thinking from a marketing or commercial angle. You're going into a customer situation, or you're crafting something for your website, for example. I mean, how much would you feel things need to be stories for story's sake, or do they need to be very kind of evidence-based, so they're kind of underpinned, or their foundations are based on fact?
Well, we always talk about, first of all of these things have to do with the idea that facts of some kind. You can't get away from this idea of facts, right? Although many religions have, many religions are based purely in dogma. Purportedly, God-given, insight and stories and things like that, right? So you can actually develop a lot of that based on this. But when it comes to marketing at the level of selling a product or service, then we really have to show how that product or service is going to physically transform that purchaser's life. So how will it be made better, more convenient, faster, stronger, whatever else it is? But it's only at the point where you can translate those facts into meaning. What is it that it means to that prospect, that you are able to create that forward momentum to purchase? And the fastest way to create meaning is through story. That's what it comes down to. So you can't get away from the facts, because sooner or later, if it's a bogus product, you're going to be found out. Right. And in an interconnected world like ours, the internet is going to quickly disseminate you're a fraud, you're bogus, right, to a lot of people. But the moment that we have a legitimate product creating legitimate value, that the facts are what create that value, but then it's transformed into meaningful story, now we have the basis of creating a brand. And that's the whole purpose of this. So, I'll give you an example with Coca-Cola.
Yeah, I was going to say, bring that one to life, because that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Now, at its core, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are the dominant colas in the world today. And, they both have a storied history, right? Dr. Pepper was pretty close to the initial innovations of that time as well, right? But Dr. Pepper is way, way down the way in the way of market domination. The number one cola in the world is Coca-Cola, and they have taken great lengths to shepherd their brand. If you recall, in the early 70s, they had that Hilltop commercial. You and I are about the same age, where they had all the people from all the different nations of the world come together on a hilltop in Italy, and talk about the world coming together. Right? I'd like to teach the world to sing, and they have been actively shepherding that brand with all sorts of iconic imagery and ideas and stories, especially the Santa Claus image, the fat, jolly old guy, enjoying a Coke, was actually a Coke innovation. Coca-Cola are the people behind the current iteration of the Santa Claus image. That's all Coke. And so what it comes down to is that, in the 70s and 80s, Pepsi decided to challenge Coke for market shelf space and such, and they launched the Pepsi Challenge. And so they have two hidden colas, and you get people of various countries trying the two colas. What do you prefer? And the vast majority preferred the taste of Pepsi. Interesting. Pepsi. So they did that and such. And one of the things behind it was that, people in the short term do prefer a sweeter taste. Okay, in the initial taste test, right? So they're not gulping whole jugs of Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They're doing small tastes. And so Pepsi had, because it's a sweeter drink, had a slight edge there. And of course, they won the Pepsi challenge. That's the fact. But here's the absolute premise behind this entire thing for market domination on the shelf. No one drinks Coke blindfolded. No one drinks Coke blindfolded. And Coca-Cola has double the market share of Pepsi. Double. That's my most recent stat on that was from 2018. So it wasn't that long ago. They've been competing for decades, right? Now, here's something even more fascinating. When they put people into an fMRI machine, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and they give them a Coke and they give them a Pepsi, the Coke drinkers, and when they know it's a Coke or a Pepsi, when they know it is, the fMRI machine will actually see the brain light up even more so, doubly so than the Pepsi drinkers. They are having literally a better physical and emotional experience knowing they are drinking Coke. Isn't that amazing? How did that happen? It's not based on the fact that they're drinking Coke. It has to do with the brand emotional experience that they are drinking this product. And who controlled that? Coca-Cola over the last 130 years.
Right. I asked for an example. I got an example. That's just brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, again, your storytelling is so powerful because I know the story, but the way that you conveyed it there was really, really compelling. So thank you for that. And I think for the audience, if there's anyone listening who, isn't aware of that story, I can certainly vouch for the accuracy of it as well, because, it is an example I've used a number of times myself, but not as eloquently as Kurian, I have to say. So thank you for sharing that one. It feels like then, I mean, using that Coke example, but then some of the other things that you've been talking about, it feels like there's quite a bit of kind of pre-planning that needs to go on here to be able to use the 7 stories within, say, one master story. There's kind of a bit of pre-thinking going on here, isn't there?
Well, you have to be cognizant of what you have to be cognizant of how the human mind absorbs information. And it's not, if they absorb a fact, you've only engaged the logical brain. But if they have the emotional experience of that transformative state that you are promising through your sales and marketing efforts, right? Once they have that emotional experience of what the future possibility could be, then we have this ability to create that want and that desire, okay, which is beyond a need. Now we have wants and desires. And so if you want to paint that picture, how do you paint that picture? And these are the 7 stories that you will tell. And you don't have to tell all 7 in a single telling. But for the brand purposes, and a brand, ultimately a brand is about meaning. Okay, that's what a brand is. What is the meaning? So, people talk about rebranding, and what did you do? You updated your logo. That's not rebranding. Okay, that means you've updated your visual assets. That's all you've done there. Your graphic assets. Real, true rebranding is about re-meaning. So you transform the meaning. In 1924, Marlboro cigarettes was introduced as a ladies' cigarette. It was a woman's cigarette. But Marlboro, which was put out by the Philip Morris Company, in 1955, they hired an advertising agency, I think it was McCann, to reimagine what it could be as a men's cigarette. And so in 1955, they brought out a whole bunch of different ideas. They had the Marlboro, or the lumberjack, the Marlboro sailor. The one that took off was the Marlboro cowboy. Within 1 year, sales had gone up by 3,258%, something crazy. They went up to $5 billion in annual sales. Okay, so a 3,200% increase. Within 2 years, it had gone up to $20 billion. Same cigarette. And it's not even the same target market. Now it's a men's cigarette. It was a ladies' cigarette. The ladies' cigarette, the tagline in 1924 was, as mild as May. That's very unmasculine. Right? It's not a masculine statement. So this idea of Marlboro country, mythical Marlboro country, the cowboy, free, masculine, rugged, independent, all these kinds of things, catapulted that cigarette into a $20 billion category in the 1950s, and all through iconic imagery like that. So that is the immense power of reimagining the meaning of your brand. How do you do it? Storytelling. What did they do? They substituted the story there. And the story now is mythical Marlboro country, where that rugged, independent cowboy, okay, and all the traits that, all the values, all the traits, character traits that cowboy has can be yours as well. You just have to put one of these in your mouth.
Yeah, and I kind of get a flashback to my Apple thing there. It's like, it's lifestyle, it's brand, it's kind of, yeah, it's irresistible. I think I was looking for the word, and it's more than immersive, isn't it? It becomes, to a point, it becomes irresistible. And when it hits that moment, there is no changing, there's no going back.
Yeah.
And it's massively commercially powerful too, isn't it?
Well, it's commercially powerful because it is a core aspect of who you are and how you receive information and become who you want to be. So everything that is behind you there, Neil, is a reflection of Neil Wilkins' identity. That's the core of identity is values and beliefs. That's the core of identity. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. Neil is in the UK, and Neil is a marketer and all that kind of stuff. That's all superficial type of stuff. When you come down to core values and belief systems, that's why are you a marketer? Why have you never chosen to leave the UK? I don't know whether you have or not, right? Why you have all of these ideas about who you are as a person and how it's reflected in what you do and what you believe in.
And so again, just translating this into the whole kind of brand marketing thing is, we've got to start paying attention, haven't we, as brand owners, as marketers, even of small startups, all the way through to the big kind of global multinationals. We've got to start paying real attention to this, because this can make or break everything. And like you say, it doesn't really matter what your pricing is or your actual product. If you get this bit wrong, people, you're on a hiding to nothing. I mean, this is going to go south very, very quickly, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I'd say to anybody listening to this podcast is that, you know what, you're already doing it. You may not be doing very well, but you are doing it, right? And so your brand identity may be no identity. No one knows who you are, what you stand for, what your origin story is, what your transformation story is going to be, who you fight against or for. They don't understand any of these 7 absolutely essential aspects of brand meaning that people have to form in their head in order to truly buy into your brand religion.
And what a beautiful way of kind of coming around full circle to kind of where we started, which was, the whole thing that this has been going on for millennia. It really has. This is not new, but it is beautifully crafted in Kurian's book, which I will put the link. It's available, I think, Kurian, is on Amazon, isn't it?
On Amazon.
So I can put the link below.
Yeah, and it's available in all the Amazons, including .uk. And it's called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell.
Perfect. So I will put the link for everyone to experience this. So if you're responsible for any kind of communication, i.e. it's everybody, then this is certainly the book for you. Kurian, this has been a really, really interesting journey, I think, for all of us, me definitely included. I'm going to start rethinking how I tell some of my stories, I think, because I do a lot of presentations, a lot of webinars, and I'm going to actually use this 7 stories approach actually in my very next one. I'm going to set myself the task of, let's see if this works for me. I know it will, but let's see if this works for me to tell the next story in my next webinar, because I have a sneaky feeling this is going to elevate things consistently and considerably.
You will have no choice but to have your presentation elevated by using these stories. It's reflexive. It'll just work.
Brilliant. And thank you so much for your time today, Kurian, because I know you're a very busy guy, and Really appreciate it. And I know everybody listening to this is going to be, noting down those 7 points and thinking, right, where do we start? Well, you start by buying the book, because that'll give you the backstory and the background as to really how to do it. But if you just want to make a start today, there's no time like the present to begin to think this through.
And very quickly, Neil, if before going to Amazon, you can actually go to my website, strategypeak.com. On the right-hand side, you can download an infographic with all 7 stories, right? You can do that for free.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're done. I mean, that is kind of, I just want to get on and do it now. You've inspired me. So thank you so much for sharing all of that so eloquently and with all the examples as well, which in themselves are storytelling. So thanks so much for your time today.
Neil, thanks for having me on your show.